Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says any deal to end the war with Russia needs to strengthen his country and not weaken it. Officials from Ukraine, the EU and the United States met over the weekend in Geneva to discuss changes to a 28-point US peace plan. It calls on Ukraine to give up some territory to Russia, among other demands. Addressing the Swedish parliament, Zelenskyy has said he would continue to work on compromises towards peace.
We are at a critical moment. And we are working closely with the United States, with European partners, with many others to define steps that can end Russia's war against us, against Ukraine, and bring real security. Putin wants legal recognition for what he has stolen, to break the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty. And that's the main problem.
Well, all sides claim progress in the Geneva talks with a joint statement calling them constructive. The Kremlin says it was not informed on the results of the negotiations. The draft proposal is seen as favouring Moscow, which continues its large-scale attacks across Ukraine. Many Ukrainians say they're sceptical that the talks will end the war.
Trump's special plan is in general a capitulation for Ukraine. I think the Ukrainian people will not agree. Even if they sign, they need to be implemented. The Ukrainian people will be the ones to do it, and they do not agree with this.
First, this is already some positive news for me. Thank God that somehow the world community reacted to these shameful 28 points, because it would have simply meant Ukraine's capitulation.
I believe that it must come to something. It cannot continue like this. Under certain conditions, they should stop this war. But giving up Ukrainian land is not right either.
Audrey MacAlpine is a journalist. She's joining us now from Kyiv. Audrey, given the draft deal seems to favour Russia so much, how surprising is it to Ukrainians that the US and Ukraine seem to have made so much progress?
Well, when that draft deal was first proposed, Ukrainians were understandably quite upset, particularly with the fact that they would have to give up territory, also that they would have to be splitting their army in half. So this news that there is so much progress is quite surprising. We saw these recent posts on Truth Social from U.S. President Donald Trump insinuating that there was indeed a lot of progress. President Zelenskyy, we heard that soundbite earlier. He was addressing a conference in Sweden today, said, though, that the main sticking point continues to be the question of territory, and the details of that have yet to emerge. We can imagine that yesterday some of the finer details, maybe regarding security guarantees, could have been ironed out. But certainly here, the feeling in Ukraine is that it's a long way away from them accepting this peace deal in any way, how they would accept giving away any form of territory, how they would accept questions of their sovereignty relating to how they run their army, how they run their education system. All of those come into question.
There is a certain amount of confusion still about where this plan originated from. I mean, there was a point at which we thought that it was actually coming from Russia and had come through the US. Marco Rubio going on X saying, no, this is a US plan. Do we have any indication from where you are in Kyiv about where the plan has originated?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of backpedaling from the U.S. side about where this plan originated from. In terms of whether Ukraine had any part of it, that's still unclear. The Umerov, who was the former defense minister, was said to be in Florida at the time that this meeting between U.S. Special Envoy Witkoff and Dmitriev took place, where they apparently poured over this plan for several days. Umerov says that he was on the sidelines with that. He was not directly involved in these talks. There were rumors that he approved certain points of the plan, which he later said that he in no way was a part of. So it appears, at least from the Ukrainian side, that the first time that they've been involved with this peace plan was over the weekend in Geneva.
Audrey, thank you very much. That's Audrey MacAlpine talking to us from Kyiv. I'm going to go to Yulia Shapovalova. She's joining us now from Moscow. Now, since we got the first indications that there was this 28-point plan, this draft plan from ostensibly from the US, Moscow said very little about any of this. Are we getting any sense, though, of how Russia is regarding these negotiations?
Well, actually, there was a recent comment from Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. According to him, the Russian side won't discuss such serious issues like the Russia-US peace plan on social media. But less than an hour ago, President Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone with his Turkish counterpart, Erdogan, and it's been reported the leaders actually exchanged views on the situation in Ukraine, including in the context of this US peace plan. Putin actually noted that the version of this US peace plan, of course reviewed by Moscow, could serve as the basis for the final peace settlement in Ukraine. And President Erdogan expressed his readiness to provide all possible assistance to the negotiating process. But the Russian side actually confirmed once again its interest in a political and diplomatic resolution of the Ukrainian war. But once again, we heard from Vladimir Putin about that before as well. All Russian conditions and interests should be taken into account. If they're not taken into account, then according to Vladimir Putin, Russia is able to continue its fighting on the battlefield because Russia is successful on the battlefield. And basically, Russia wants to achieve its goals. It wants to take Ukraine under control. It wants to fight for Ukrainian territories. That's according to Vladimir Putin.
Yulia, thank you very much indeed. Yulia Shapovalova there bringing us up to date from Moscow. Vasily Kashin is a director with the Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies at the Higher School of Economics. He's joining us now live from Moscow. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for being with us. We were hearing there that Yulia was describing that one of the main aims that Vladimir Putin had put forward was essentially the taking of Ukrainian land plus other considerations. There are 28 points, or there have been 28 points on this draft plan. In your assessment, what are the most important things for Vladimir Putin?
Well, actually, the most important part of 28-point plan are conditions related to military and military political issues. They are, I believe, in fact, even more important for Russia than the remaining 19% of territory of Donetsk region. And these conditions include Ukraine not joining NATO, Ukraine not having long-range weapons, or at least not being supplied with long-range weapons from the West, and Ukrainian army is being put within certain limits, no foreign military presence on Ukrainian soil. I believe these conditions are of utmost importance for Russia because Russia sees any foreign deployment in Ukraine as undermining strategic stability.
Given the fact that the US is playing such a significant role in these negotiations, I want to ask you how much leverage essentially that gives the US when it comes to Vladimir Putin and Moscow in terms of this deal. How important is the Russia-US relationship to Moscow, and how would that influence whether or not what negotiations it takes part in this deal?
Well, the future of Russia-US relations is being discussed between Russia and the United States on various levels. And there is an understanding that if we manage to resolve the Ukrainian issue, there are prospects of very good deals, very good progress, which would be beneficial for both countries. At the same time, there is also an understanding that until we resolve the Ukrainian issue, there will be no progress on other issues because it will not make sense to do anything until the Ukrainian case is closed. So that's why we need to, both sides, I believe, are interested in closing this case.
Mm-hmm. Our correspondent Yulia was just saying that Vladimir Putin has already said he is ready to negotiate as long as Russia essentially gets what it wants. Otherwise, he is happy to, or willing to, I should say, continue on the battlefield. How much support is there amongst the Russian people for that war, should it continue?
So far, Russian government manages to limit the impact of war on Russian society in general. So we had only one wave of mobilization in the end of 2022, and we have a certain rather significant economic slowdown this year, but it's not a recession. And that slowdown was caused by inflation and anti-inflation measures by the central bank. So I wouldn't call it major war hardships. The war is not really felt by much of the population, so they would support achieving the core goals of the special military operation in Ukraine, which would be exactly all these military, political, and territorial gains.
Can I ask you about the impact, or to enlarge on what you're saying about the impact on the Russian people of this war? Because, of course, there have been sanctions that have been brought in against Russia, against senior Russian officials, but they also, certainly in the early stages, seem to have affected significantly the economy of Russia. One of the considerations in this draft plan is to have those sanctions removed. And clearly, if they were not having an impact on Russia, there would be no pressure to remove the sanctions. So to what extent is there a pressure on Russia and the Russian people to try to move forward with negotiations in order to alleviate the pressure from those sanctions?
The sanctions and the fate of the sanctions are not a major component of the negotiations, I believe, for one simple reason. The US politics is unstable. It's very unstable, and sanctions can be removed and can be reintroduced. So you cannot trade some irreversible political concessions on military political issues for the sanctions. And there is also, of course, example of the Iranian nuclear deal. So it's being discussed. It's very well remembered. Of course, lifting of the sanctions would be beneficial for the Russian economy. The problem is that people don't really believe that there will be really significant lifting of the sanctions, maybe something partial. And even if that happens, given to the huge polarization of the US politics, the sanctions, once lifted, could be quickly reintroduced if there is another president in the White House.
Vasily Kashin, we appreciate you joining us on Al Jazeera, giving us your thoughts on this. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.